Welcome everybody to session 3 of the Advocacy and Water Protection in Native California Symposium. We're so glad that we got to this point in this speaker series and throughout this crazy kind of fall season that we've had. My name is Sinead Talley. I've been working with Save California Salmon since June. I've been helping to bring you this event as well as mobilizing for California water justice. And I'm also involved with Cody, who is the host of the last, I guess, presentation panel. And Dr. Kota Risling-Baldi and Dr. Caitlin Reed, who you all should recognize from some of the other series and presentations throughout the summer on the HSU Native American Studies Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace, which is actually being designed on campus right now. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, you can obviously reach out to me. I think you all know my email address or multiple email addresses. If you don't, I'll put it in the chat, just let me know. We do have a food sovereignty lab, or the food sovereignty speaker series coming up. It's starting next week, and it's going to be every Monday from 1 to 2:30, I think every Monday in the month of November. And I'll put some links in the chat for that as well, actually, I think. Yep, Cody already did. Thanks, Cody. So just a couple housekeeping things. We're going to be following the same format as the previous session. So we're going to let the presenters go through their presentations, and then we'll use the Q&A feature to, or you guys, the attendees, can use the Q&A feature to ask any questions throughout, but we are going to answer questions at the end. Let's see, what else? I think that's kind of it. We've been, obviously working really hard to get this event to come to you guys. So if you have the means and you would like to donate to Save California Salmon to continue the work that we've been doing and to bring you more incredible events like this one, then Cody will put the link in the chat for that as well. And without further ado, Sinead, I'm going to ask you to mute until it's your time to present. And Jewelina, we're going to start with you. So Jewelina is an Indigenous artist who has firsthand been dealing with the injustices from a failing educational and justice system. With each obstacle that we've faced as Indigenous people, whether that be through history, appropriation, misinformation, violation of our rights, murder, alcoholism, or dependency, Jewelina has used her vision to repaint the future for Indigenous youth. Her artwork provides a safe space for students and clients alike to retell their history and discredit the very same systems that are meant to exterminate her people. She's a mother who understands the importance of education, which is why she continues to reach the imaginations of her Indigenous youth. Her life story reflects the art of decolonization, which is in fact the title of her presentation. So Jewelina, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie. So I want to thank everybody for allowing me to take part in this. As you can see, these are some of the pieces that I've worked on, and each piece that I've worked on, it reflects the story and history of our people and how we've survived. And some of these pieces also I use to tell stories of our the salmon and the bear relationship. To talk about. This piece was actually created by my daughter, and this one was used to talk about the statistics for murdered and missing Indigenous women. And she'll actually be taking part in a workshop with me. And so my name is Jewelina Acosta. I was going to have a slide. However, there have been a lot of different issues going on at home that have prevented me from doing so. So what I actually did decide to do, and this is kind of like last minute, is to work on pieces and kind of allow you guys to see what my process is creating these pieces. So here I have a piece that I was working on when someone had asked me to tell a story about myself and kind of use a piece to reflect where I come from. So I was born March 14th of 1990, so I'm 30 years old, and I come from the Yokaia people, and Yokaia actually translates to the Deep Valley. So I come from the Deep Valley people, and when they actually came here, they weren't able to pronounce Yokaia, so they changed it to Yokaia. And I am the daughter to Desra Lorero. My grandmother was Emma Mitchell, and my great-grandmother was Ada Knight, and she was the niece to Stephen Knight. And Stephen was one of the chiefs who had served as a trustee for Yokaia Rancheria when it was purchased in 1881. And he served as a trustee for the property in 1947. In May of 1942, he was involved in this civil rights case when his 11-year-old granddaughter was told to take a seat in the segregated area of the Ukiah movie theater. And after this, it was a turning point for Indian white business relationships in the Ukiah area, and many local Indian people spoke with pride at the outcome about the changes that occurred. So this was from an article that I had actually found where it states what he told to a sociologist. So it says, "Now I'm just waiting for some place in town to refuse to serve an Indian who is clean and decent and goes in honestly for service. The minute that happens, we'll slap a suit for denial of right against them. Nothing has happened yet. The merchants in town are a little scared, I think. I know the beauty parlor operators got all excited about it and held meetings about it, but nothing has happened yet. Last week, Bills, who was Stephen's son, went to the barber shop next to the Maple Cafe, the worst place in town as far as cutting Indians' hair is concerned. And the guy cut his hair without a word. It looks like if the Indians are going to get their rights and enjoy them, they've got to fight for them." So again, Stephen Knight was the uncle to my great grandma Ada Knight. And Ada Knight was my great grandma, and she had actually tended to Yokaia Rancheria's vineyards when nobody else would. And this was for years before she actually got permission to be another trustee to Yokaia Rancheria. And when I look back at my family tree, I found many similarities shared between me and my relatives. So my grandmother, I picked up lessons from her. My grandmother, again, was Emma Rose Mitchell. And so this was my grandmother. And this was a piece that I started painting. So I would have a platform and I would have something to use so I could share this with people. And so I use my artwork in a way that tells my own story, but it gives my students and the people who take part in the workshops that I do to tell their own story and their own history. So whatever resonates with them, I give them that ability to do that with the art workshops. I also do make regalia, and I'm a tattoo artist as well. So with my tattoo artwork, it's the same thing. When I create pieces for individuals, when they come to me and they ask me about creating pieces for them, I take their story and I envision it. And what I envision, I turn that into artwork. And so these are some pieces that I've done. This one was actually one that I had done myself with permission from the family. This is for a case that's still ongoing for Khadijah Britton, who is missing from Covelo. So I created this piece using a photo that I found of her. This piece here. I used a lot of different items in this one. And a lot of my pieces, you can tell, are of women. So it reflects everything that I aspire to be, I want to be like, and it tells the story about myself, where I come from, people that I come from. So this piece here is really important because this is a piece that I'll be using to do a workshop with my daughter. And after this workshop, after we do this workshop with anyone who's interested, I'll be creating I guess it would be a line, I don't know, a art theme, something that where we will be taking, just as I'm doing here, telling you where I come from, we'll be taking the history of where Delea, so this is my daughter, and that's her, how you spell her name. So we'll be taking portraits, or if we don't have photos, then I'll be painting portraits of our family. So that way we have an opportunity to tell her story, where she comes from, and share that in a way that will resonate with other people. So when we talk about MMIW, it's not just something that resonates with us because we currently have women who are missing or women who were murdered. I have another friend who her sister was murdered, and her name was Nicole Smith. And she was a singer and a dancer, and we lost her. So this helps give an opportunity to people who don't have that, which is us as Indigenous people. We don't have a platform to where we can speak on issues, and this is what I'm trying to do for myself, for my daughter, for the youth in our community, is to give them that opportunity to talk about issues that are going on. So when we talk about the salmon, I've also given, and I don't have it here, but I've also done outreach for abalone and talking about the biology of abalone and the current issues, that environmental issues that are going on. So I've done that by using artwork, to translate that to youth, because artwork for them is the same thing that it was for me when I was growing up. It was a way to kind of escape, or a way to communicate what was going on. So I try to provide that for my students, that's the furthest that I can get with this presentation. There was a lot of issues that were going on, during this month that it didn't help me prepare for this all the way, but I am going to be working on that project again. I'm sorry, the project that I will be doing with my daughter, where it shows our history and our family tree. It's going to be displayed at a cafe in Town Green in Winter. I'm also going to be so with that, we're going to be in that mural, we're going to be showing showing the community what it looks like for us to provide healing to our people, and by using the oak tree. So the oak tree is going to represent the life, right? The tree of life, and we're going to have hands as well. Sorry, I'm kind of just explaining it to you guys, but we're going to have hands that show an elder's hand, the youth's hand, and then an adult's hand, and showing how we're all supporting one another to make changes in our community. And then from the roots, it's going to turn into water. So that's going to show the importance of clean water and how we have to sustain life for the salmon, because the salmon are going to be in that as well. We're going to have acorn leaves, and I believe it's going to be little acorns that our youth are going to be able to write positive messages on. So this mural will also be in Town Green in Windsor. We're still working on that as to like the deadline when we'll actually be putting paint to the surface along the side of this building. But this is pretty much just my story and what I'm doing in our community. And I would hope that if anyone chooses to take part in the workshop, we will be also talking about creation stories that connect us to these animals, such as the salmon, such as the abalone. If you see, I did the woodpecker, the helated woodpecker here. Flickers also are important for our people. Here's a flicker band. I'm just trying to find a picture of the flicker bird. Because a lot of people, even in our Indigenous communities, don't know how to properly identify these animals or these items that we're using, the natural resources. So this here, like this is a river otter fur. This comes from a hawk. This is from goose, and then this is swan feathers. Then these are pine nuts, which you can actually collect. So these are all natural resources. And so again, when I'm educating someone about my artwork, certain pieces, I'll talk about every item that's being used with this. So I'm educating our youth at the same time we're painting a picture. At the same time, they're finding out about their history, where they come from. And when I was getting involved with Oak Manor School, there was, so here is a basket. And this basket was woven by my grandmother, Emma, who I showed the picture of earlier. These are my babies. So this basket was woven by my grandmother, and I had met Corinne Pierce, who's a basket weaver, and she repaired it for me. And she was able to, because she repaired it for me, she was able to tell me a lot about my grandmother. My grandmother did a backward stitch in this basket. And whenever we do baskets, we usually will have a doorway. And so I met Corinne Pierce through weaving, because I had woven my own basket, a doll basket, and then started my baby basket. I had met her through that, but what she did do for me after we had met each other was she helped me to get into Oak Manor School classrooms, where I could go in there and work with our youth and talk about issues such as the salmon, with issues regarding the abalone, with issues regarding acorns and sudden oak death, with issues regarding the flicker birds and how some people can collect them without thinking about how we're going to ensure their safety and their future so we can continue to use them, right? So Green had helped me with that. I had also met Rose hammock. Her and Bonnie are the ones who Bonnie Lockhart are the ones who I'll be working on the mural project with in Windsor. And I had actually met Rose through practicing our culture. You know, Rose is a dancer, but she's also worked with the youth, and she's the one who brought forth this mural she's the one who brought it to my attention and asked me to take part in this. Bonnie, I had met her through our love for artwork. So she's an artist as well. And she had worked with Anaya. I'm sorry. So when I started working with her with that, I was going in and sitting down with the youth and working with them. And we had done we went outside, and it was just something to kind of allow the youth to get comfortable with us. So we all went outside, we started drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, and I drew a flicker bird. And when I drew this flicker bird, this young girl came up to me and she said, "What's that?" And I told her what the flicker bird was and why it was important to our people. And so something like that could be insignificant to anyone else is really important for our people to continue with our practices. And so to see our youth not having that knowledge, it makes me want to do this even more. And so it makes me push to build relationships with people outside of just doing artwork. You know, I've gone to meetings where I've had to speak on issues relating to the abalone and why it's important for us to be there. And so even though I identify myself as an artist, identify myself as a mother, I still have a responsibility to our community, and this is the gift that I feel Creator provided me, because for the education side of things, I've been basically a mother since I was 10. And that comes with tending to the needs of my siblings, because in our communities, we didn't have that. And we don't talk about that when we go to school. You know, those aren't issues that we talk about. You know, we talk about other things, you know, how to brush your teeth, or issues that we don't stress on at home. So me being able to relate with a lot of our youth on that level, it helps me with my job. And so again, that's what I use. It's a part of my work and my life's work. And I just appreciate everyone who's participated in this with me and allowed me to speak on it, and getting to know myself, getting to know the work that I do. And I hope that you're able to take away something today that resonates with you, that's going to help you make changes within your own community, whether that be with the people in your life or the animals that are surrounding you, or even just thinking about water and how important it is to talk about clean water. And so I appreciate this opportunity, and that's my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jewelina, for sharing your history with us and your artwork. And if you want to put in the chat a link to the like art session or webinar presentation, however you're holding it, if there's a link that you want to put in the chat, that would be awesome. I'm sure some people would be really interested in learning more about the work that you do. And I'm gonna have you turn off your video, and I'm gonna
Okay.
present our next presenter.
Perfect.
So next we have Sinead Talley, and Sinead is a Karuk student from Orleans in the Environment and Community Program, presenting on her intended research on Karuk land stewardship, sovereignty, and gender dynamics in Karuk communities. Sinead, it's all you. I'm gonna unpin this. And all right.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, Jewelina. I really appreciated your presentation. That was beautiful. Ayuki kawara nanafwiti Sinead, nawara Karuk aras, kanamnek karu savorum karu chimkini niaramsit. Hello, everyone. My name is Sinead Talley. I'm a Karuk person whose family is from the villages of Kanamnik, Savorum, and Chimkini, near what is now known as Orleans, California, along the Klamath River. I'm going to share my screen with you guys right now before I start. I have a presentation. I'm not good with this Zoom stuff. We're going to try. Can everybody see the screen okay? Carrie?
It looks good from here, yeah.
My work, in addition to being from Orleans and a Karuk person, I'm also a first-year student in the HSU Environment and Community Program. I'm here today to talk about my intentions for my proposed research project and thesis, which is centered on exploring, amplifying, and celebrating the voices and lived experiences of Karuk women living in and around the homelands today, whose work to maintain the health of our world and culture, whether in a professional or personal capacity, through organizing, activism, on-the-ground cultural burning, fishing, hunting, gathering, artistry, etc., has helped to sustain Karuk people, our homelands, and our lifeways since time immemorial. Before I really get into things, I want to thank everyone for their time today, for the opportunity to speak and to listen to such powerful advocates from and for their respective communities. I feel honored to be here to continue to learn from decades of activism and profound on-the-ground work. The purpose of this step and the work that I'm doing now is through which I hope to bring storytelling combined with discussions of academic and community testimonies, is to explore connection to land, place, and community for Karuk women as elements of resistance, empowerment, healing, and hope. So Karuk cultural conceptions of land stewardship are interwoven with reciprocity and respect for the lands, waters, and all living beings within Karuk homelands. I'm hoping that through the thesis I'm proposing to write, which is coming from a culmination of experiences, conversations with Karuk and other Indigenous women, as well as reading and learning from Indigenous women's writing over the course of years, the perspectives of Karuk women can be amplified and celebrated. For this project, specifically in the 4 semesters that I have in the ANC program here, I'm hoping to interview and include the voices of many Karuk women from different age groups, backgrounds, and roles, so that a range of individual and collective intergenerational knowledge holders, on the ground organizers, field and office workers, Karuk language speakers, cultural practitioners, and others within our communities can offer perspectives through the lens of their own experience and beliefs regarding connection to place, resistance, hope, healing, land tenure, community building, and local and other aspects of local and regional natural resource-based initiatives. It's my hope that local, tribal, and community-based initiatives happening now in many capacities can be amplified through this writing as well. Of course, these themes and experiences can't be appropriately contextualized without a discussion of the history of genocide in California and the impacts of the gold rush for Karuk and neighboring local tribes in light of the accompanying gender-based violence that impacts Indigenous women at among the highest rates of any demographic in the country. So the challenges Karuk women experience today cannot be separated from the history and ongoing impacts of colonialism itself within Karuk territory, or in Karuk homelands within the last 170 years. And so I guess for me, putting together a visual timeline like this helps to highlight how short a time it really has been since colonization began in the area, particularly since Karuk and other tribes in the region have been some of the most recently contacted in the United States. The timeline itself points to some, but not all, by any means, of the points in time I will be including as part of the background section of the thesis. Many of you are intimately familiar with this history, so I'll save time by not going into detail too much, but a few points to be included are the initial gold rush and genocide settlement, and state-sanctioned violence by the state of California, Red Cap Wars along the Klamath, and the indigenous resistance along the Klamath, the boarding school and allotment eras, dam installment, as well as organizing, protesting for removal led by tribal peoples ever since, Go Road activism, the Klamath fish kill, and other key points in time for Karuk people and communities into the present. So now I guess that brings us to the research questions I'm hoping to explore, which are very much in draft form at this point. I have some edits that I want to make, and they're all pending feedback from others as well, which I'll talk more about in a bit as far as the approach goes, but they are as follows right now. The first is, how do community and workplace roles and the natural resources impact Indigenous women's relationships to land, place, and culture in the Karuk context? And in what ways do these roles feel most meaningful and impactful for Karuk women living in and around their ancestral homelands today? Then the second is, how or do Karuk women's sense of connection to place, land, culture, and community influence their conceptions of land stewardship, femininity, and gender-based roles in Karuk communities? Like I said, these are still in progress. I've got some changes I'm thinking about making to wording, and I'm trying to condense more. I'm also in conversations now with the tribe's higher education and research division coordinator at the Department of Natural Resources. And so all of this is pending review, feedback, and approvals by the Karuk Resources Advisory Board and Karuk Tribal Council. And any feedback I receive through that process, I'll be incorporating. Hopefully within the next month or two, I'll be able to move that timeline along. So this is a quote from a book that I was assigned earlier this term in one of my courses through the Environment and Community Program. It's by Julie C. in Environmental Justice in a Moment of Danger, her book that came out earlier this year. So I wanted to share that with you all. And she says, storytelling is a deeply political act that brings a radical democratic vision to an issue often seen as scientific. Community stories contribute to undermining the legitimacy of state officials and their policies and to shifting public consciousness around the human right to water. It counters individualism and internalization so that people's individual experiences are transformed into a collective narrative. And so that's part of what this quote really resonated with me because that's part of what I'm trying to bring into this work is that aspect of storytelling. And because much like Linda Smith talks about in her seminal work, Decolonizing Methodologies, research and writing for and by Indigenous peoples are forms of storytelling in their own right, and underscores for me why it's critical to hear from Karuk women about their perspectives on their lived experiences and culture and different cultural aspects rather than the history academia has of observing and of othering Indigenous peoples. So what I'm proposing is new, but these are concepts I hope to meaningfully explore and engage with as an act of storytelling resistance and remapping within Karuk contexts. The last of those terms, remapping, is a concept that I'm citing from Dr. Jewelina Acosta's Mark My Words, which I'll discuss later as one of the many foundational texts informing this project. Overall, the ideas present in this work build from not only thousands of years of Karuk relationships with their homelands and culture, generations of activism, and as well as from scholarships and advocates in academia across disciplines, but also from years of conversations and experiences I've had in my own life so far that I will position and acknowledge within this thesis as well. Much of the beauty of this work I'm finding is in its potential to foster and express connection between Karuk people and their homelands, as well as the approach of having Karuk women themselves talk about their perspectives, experiences, and to have their knowledge centered and to guide the conversations. I want to be clear too in positioning that I am only one Karuk woman. I do not speak for anyone other than myself. And so in that effort, I'll be working with women who choose to share their experiences with me as collaborators and co-creators and as the primary knowledge holders in these conversations, much like many Indigenous scholars whose work I will cite and center in this thesis as well. I will likely offer options for follow-up interviews and to have people do close reviews of texts that reference their testimonies to make sure anything written reflects what they intended when they said it and to ensure that they have agency over what is included throughout the project. So I'm really hoping that as I undergo this work in partnership with the Karuk tribe and in coordination with community members along the river, inland and out toward the coast, those values are reflected. I can say with all assurance that while the roles that I've taken on myself over the years have shifted in these collective community-based efforts, none of what I've done or will do would be possible without support systems and conversations, primarily with Indigenous women in my life I've been privileged to know. And those supportive circles have kept me motivated to keep having these conversations, to keep healing, and to maintain hope for the future, none of which are easy things. So as I've mentioned earlier, I'm currently in conversation with the tribe's environmental higher education and research coordinator, as well as the PICYAV education team, to work through IRB processes, gain necessary approvals, make adjustments, pending feedback. I'd like to do this work in person as much as possible, so respecting and being mindful about COVID, as well as ongoing trauma in Karuk country as a result of the mass displacement in Happy Camp last month because of the Slater fire. I'm imagining the bulk of interviews, focus groups, and coordination for the visual arts piece, if possible, will start taking place sometime in the spring or summer of next year. So bringing us to the literature review. This thesis is grounded in Kimberly Crenshaw's work in intersectional feminism and critical race theory, as well as in Indigenous studies and studies in gender and sexuality, including but not limited to Mapping the Margins by Kimberly Crenshaw, Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Smith, Queer Indigenous Studies. It's a compilation of essays edited by Driscoll, Mark My Words, which I referenced earlier, by Dr. Mishwana Goman, and then Chisa Oros's work through the Environment and Community Program here at HSU on the role of Fort Humboldt in the Gold Rush, which also looks at, in the context of Fort Humboldt, the impacts of that colonial violence on Indigenous women. So these are all foundational and a small part of the working literature review, and they've been included for, I've got a few more slides of these kind of pieces that have been included for the author's discussion of various themes and ideas that are foundational to the project. Here we see We're Dancing for You by Hoopa scholar and HSU professor, Dr. Katrina Upton, Mark My Words by Dr. Mishwana Goman, Tonawanda Band of Seneca associate professor, and Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People by environmental sociologist and longtime Karuk tribe collaborator, Dr. Kari Norgard from the University of Oregon. So these are all also absolutely formative works for their decolonized approach to their work, the methodologies they use, for their use of testimony from local Indigenous peoples, and for the use historical and present day information about Karuk homelands, which is critical for a full understanding of Indigenous feminisms and futurisms within Karuk context. So these are just a few more titles I'm including. I'll highlight, as we have always done, by First Nation scholar and artist and writer Leanne Simpson. This is one of a few of her works that I'm planning to reference. She does a lot of different types of writing, which I appreciate. She also brings her position and cultural perspective into her writing on language, land, and food sovereignty. One of the most influential chapters is her work on land as pedagogy, which ties into things I'll include within this work. So these are just the last ones that I'll include here. A few more works on Indigenous futurisms and healing that are helping me to shape my thinking regarding how to approach this work. The center book has a lot by local Indigenous peoples, and so that's been inspiring too. So analysis of Karuk language and creation stories will also be included to contextualize analyses and individual testimonies discussed in interviews. This part I'm planning to look at in consultation with a lot of other people, including tribal historians, linguists, cultural practitioners, as well as the tribe as an organization itself, and through ongoing coordination with my review committee and the Department of Natural Resources and Karuk Resources Advisory Board. I want to offer another disclaimer here too about creation stories, because even in the way Indigenous oral histories were documented, there are issues with the way white ethnographers documented Karuk and other peoples and cultures in creation stories, and with regards to gender dynamics that'll be discussed farther in thesis 2. Both Dr. Norgard and Dr. Risling-Baldy's work talks about disclaimers regarding interpretation of these kind of things. I think in Dr. Norgard's book, Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People, Leif Hillman is cited talking about the quote unquote perversion of a lot of these translations. And so I think that's an important part to bring into that as well, is that this is going to be a team of people working on this, and I will be doing writing to bring those ideas all forward, but it's going to be just that this isn't representative of all Karuk people's ideas or anything. And so I don't want to give that idea at any point. So I'm also planning to bring analysis of poems and literature by Native women that speak to these issues as well. This passage is a piece by Joy Harjo in her compilation of poetry called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. She says, for any spark to make a sound, it must be transformed by pressure. There must be unspeakable need, muscle of belief, and wild, unknowable elements. I'm singing a song that can only be born after losing a country. And so I've included this here because it makes me think about the strength of so many Indigenous women's voices that I know and have heard from and learned from, and it resonates with how essential it is to have agency over how we share our individual and collective experiences. This piece in particular reminds me that writings by Indigenous women put words to the experiences that so many of us endure in our lifetimes, the systems that work to disconnect us from our homelands, communities, and families. So that hope for the future, that connection to oneself, to community, to place, like many of these authors have noted, is such a light and a source of strength. I find a great deal of meaning in that, and in the ways that Indigenous women, those who are with us today, as well as those who are not, have carried that fight forward. As a project, this is all in its beginning stages, but I see research as a way to carry that story on, as prayer, as song. And so I want to thank you again for your time. I want to bring things to a close for now, but I appreciate you listening and being here to learn from you all today. Sharing my screen now. Figure out how to do. Carrie, can you?
I think if you look where it says share screen, there should be a stop share button right next to it. Kind of, or, oh, there you go. Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow, I'm really looking forward to watching your thesis develop. You have so much information tied up into it already. I think that I'm like super impressed as a person who's also in the environment and community program, but still working on writing. I feel like you're way ahead of me. So great work. I'm super excited. And if you can go ahead and just mute yourself and turn off your camera, then I'm going to introduce our next presenter. Let's see here. Okay, so last we had Katrina Upton, Katrina Thompson Upton, I'm sorry. She is an entrepreneurial mom of 3 and an avid horse lover. She's an enrolled citizen of the Tallawah Dene Nation, and she currently sits on the All Care COC Community Advisory Council, secretary of her local food bank, and tribal representative on the Curry County Suicides Council. She's the founder and creative director of the Dahotra Consulting and Design, a small web design studio in Brookings, Oregon, serving tribal nations it serves tribal nations and organizations, sorry. In 2020, she started a community outreach project to revitalize the Nuiya, I hope I pronounced that a little bit right, language, and to bring it back to its homeland. In 2021, she'll be launching the G7 Planner, the first analog planner specifically made for tribal leaders. Welcome, Katrina. I'm so glad you could join us today. And if you want to go ahead and share your screen, I'm going to turn off my sound and my camera, and you should be good to go.
All right, let's give this a shot and see how it goes. See what technology will give us today. All right. Do you see my screen? Do you see a full screen, or do you see my notes?
We see your notes. So if you go to, is this on PowerPoint?
Canva.
Or is it Canva? Ooh. If you X out of the presentation, not of the, like, see where the X is on the top right-hand corner of your window right there, of your presentation screen?
Okay, let's see.
See if when you go to presenter view, but it's going to show your notes. Try it again. Let's just see.
Try this again.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it with Canva. I just know how to do it with PowerPoint.
So you still see it, just my notes?
We do see the notes. I can,
No, that's all right. We'll do it with it. No problem. You can read
Or-
along with me.
yeah, or I can try and share it without note. Let me see if I can try and share it without the notes. And then you can tell me when to click. If you want to keep yours open and then not share your screen, we can try that as well.
All right.
Let's see. Yep, I think this will work. So let me just give this a try. Can you see that?
Yeah. That
Okay.
work?
Yes, I'm going to stop my video and mute myself and just let me know when you want me to click to the next slide.
All right. All right. So, Shukwegia, good afternoon. I'm the last one here. We've made it. I'm so honored and thankful for all the presentations. I've learned so much today. So just wanted to give a shout out and say thank you to everybody. Shahushi Katrina, my name is Katrina. I am an enrolled citizen of the Tallawahdaini Nation, and I am joining you today from Chitagili, which is the upper Chetco River, part of the Chechutni homelands. In Brookings, Oregon, and I am going to talk today about wildfires, specifically the 2017 Chetco Bar Fire. Let's see, the first slide here shows some of my ancestors. I'm a direct descendant of Dahotra, her daughter Shamet and her daughter Sarah Shannon Payne, who is actually buried in our family cemetery on our property. Next slide shows Sarah, a picture of Sarah with her husband holding a banjo there. He was from Switzerland. Sarah managed to escape the removal to the Siletz Reservation during the Rogue River Indian Wars, and she actually hid deep in an area on the Chetco River, on the very upper end of the Chetco River, where she found a safe spot, and she stayed, and she made this her home. She never left, and we've never left either. Next slide shows a group family photo of us in our family cemetery, standing next to Sarah's headstone. My children are currently the 7th generation living on this same very spot today, our heritage homelands. So we're not just property owners, but we're actually stewards of these ancestral lands, of our heritage lands. The next slide shows what our property looked like after August 20th, 2017. On that day at 3:45 p.m., our property, our ancestral homeland, and all of our heritage was destroyed by the Chetco Bar Fire. Next slide. For the last 3 years, we have put together a research team, and we have been very actively working on investigating why and how the Chetco Bar Fire became so massive and so destructive. And I just wanted to share a few things that we learned with you today. Next slide. So you're looking here at a recent map from Oregon Wildfire Today that shows fire history in Southwest Oregon and Northwest California from the year 2000 all the way to just recently, September 16th, 2020, showing all the multiple fires. And you will see that there's a lot of similarities in the way that wildfires all across the Pacific Northwest forests are managed. And you also see that a lot of these fires are actually start and burn inside of previous fire burn scars, which is significant because previously we didn't think that, you know, when they start in a burn scar that they won't last, or they'll peter out and they won't explode. And we're finding that is not the case. The next slide shows the actual start of the Chetco Bar Fire. It was first reported by a commercial airline pilot on July 12th. The cause of the fire which was very small. It was assumed, and you'll be hearing me say this word a lot today, assumed. It was assumed that the cause of this fire was from lightning, and it was reported as being a lightning-caused fire. The next slide will show a lightning map. We learned in our research that there was, in fact, no lightning on July 12th. Later in December of 2017, the Forest Service ended up backdating the start of the Chetco Bar Fire to June 26, approximately 18 days earlier or previous. Next slide. So looking here, we also learned that on this new date of June 26, this new presumed start date, that the Oregon Air National Guard was conducting training exercises over the Kalmiopsis wilderness area, as they often do. We see them quite often. And they use flares, and they're actually called lightning flares. These flares are used in self-defense training exercises, but sometimes remnants of these military flares have been found on the ground, and they have been found to start fires. And in fact, that was the case in the Heart Mountain National Wildlife Refuge, where they actually showed that a fire had started due to these flares. To date, there has never been an investigation into the cause or the start of the Chetco Bar Fire. Next slide is an image that I took at the Illinois smoke jumper base, which is no longer active, unfortunately. But if we did go with the actual start date of June 26 for the Chetco Bar Fire, then we have to wonder, why was the fire not discovered sooner than July by an airline pilot? During fire season, the best way to stop a fire is to catch it early. We might assume that, assuming again, that technology to detect fires has advanced with use of drones and satellites and heat maps and infrared and all these tools to a point where it would be easy to detect wildfires, and it wouldn't be an issue or a problem, but we're finding that's not the case. Next slide is a picture of a decommissioned lookout tower. There really is no substitute for human eyes watching our forests. These lookout towers used to be the instrument of choice, and today there's less than 10 of these towers used in Oregon. And this particular lookout tower, Quail Prairie, is surrounded by the burn scar of the Chetco Bar Fire. Next slide is an image taken from an airplane of the Chetco Bar Fire moving towards Brookings, Oregon. The next slide is showing a smoke plume. So by August 15th, more than a month after its discovery, the Chetco Bar Fire had reached 5,000 acres, and still at this time there had been no fire teams actively attacking the flames. It was basically just burning in the wilderness, just burning. Now we assumed, again, that word assume, we assumed that fire officials had a good plan to put the fire out. It did not appear that was the case, though. Fire Officer Monty Edwards told the Curry County Pilot newspaper on July 28th that the Chetco Bar Fire would likely just be allowed to burn itself out. Next slide. So by mid-August, the Chetco Bar Fire had quadrupled in size. During a very short 4-day period, it went from 22,000 acres to 97,000 acres burned inside the Kalmiopsis wilderness area. which, by the way, was traditionally a very special place for Indigenous peoples. It was oak savanna, and it was imperative to our Indigenous life. An oak savanna is a type of lightly forested grassland. It had prairies where oaks were the dominant tree. Next slide. This is a aerial shot of our property specifically, and we can see the fire getting very close here. Our area has an annual wind event, katabatic winds called the Chetco effect. And although all of the local people knew about this and attempted to inform the incident commanders and the fire authorities, it was ultimately dismissed as just a myth. And so the predictive fire models failed. When the winds hit, it blew up. Our local resources were not utilized, and unfortunately, coordination plans with our county commissioners and whatnot, none of these were followed. Next slide. You can see here a fire truck, a fire crew coming from Arizona. There were many, many of them that drove past our home. Much of our Pacific Northwest tribal lands are very rural and very remote, and many of the areas are designated as wildland urban interface areas. And we learned, we were actually quite shocked to learn how ineffective GPS technology was for these crews, for these fire people, for these fire engines and so forth. There were so many of them that were lost and asking us for directions and asking us for help. They didn't know where they were, and they didn't know how to get to where they needed to go. So it was really quite shocking to see how ineffective the technologies, even today, were for these workers, these people trying to help. Next slide. So this is a burn view. This is a view of Mount Emily and Brookings. We call it in May. She was burning through the night of September 4th and was headed directly to the town of Brookings. Although this picture is blurry, it's not the best picture. My phone camera doesn't take the best pictures at night for some reason. But it is significant to note here in this picture that we can clearly see it. We tried to report it, we tried to tell people, and it was not reported, and it was just considered to be a rumor that was going around, that it wasn't actually true that Mount Emily was burning. So misinformation, disinformation, accurate information, all of these things are very difficult during a wildfire event. Next slide shows Choco Boy. So we assumed that we would be provided structure protection, which we were in the 2002 Biscuit Fire. We assumed similar procedures would be followed, but they were not. We and our neighbors were offered no assistance whatsoever, no structure protection. And so we learned how little amount of water is actually needed to save a house. This little beat up 1972 old Ford fire truck that my dad had restored for our personal use, it could only pump about 200 gallons of water. And he emptied that tank on my house, and that was enough to save it, which I was surprised. I thought that it would take, a lot more than that. But my dad was able to save my house with this fire truck. Next slide. I took this picture as I was escaping from the fire from our house. This is actually taken at a neighbor's house, and the fire is our neighbor's house burning. Notification and management systems failed. They failed us, and they left my family trapped. And I'm hearing that similar story with many families that have been trapped in recent fires. It seems to be a common theme that notification systems are just not working. We learned that unapproved actions during a high wind event is what caused this and destroyed our homes and other properties on Kate Road, and ultimately threatened the town of Brookings. Next slide. This slide shows our property, our barnyard. Although we lost multiple generations of homestead equipment, buildings, and artifacts, sacred sites, 7 generations worth of stuff. We lost a lot. But it's interesting to note that we learned that this kind of loss is not counted. Even today, discussions of the Chetco Bar Fire will only count the actual houses that are lost, the homes that are lost. Other losses like we had are not counted. Next slide just shows another view of what used to be my great-great-grandmother's house. And again, it was not counted as a loss in the official reports. The next slide shows my husband's work truck. So we learned that aluminum melts at 1200 degrees. And wow, that's a hot fire. We assumed we'd be given post-fire cleanup information on how to deal with contaminants, and we were not. And we learned a lot about how toxic this is to clean up. And I'm wondering, what are the long-term effects of wildfires that burn this hot on our water and our air and our soil? And I think it will take many years to determine what kind of actual damage and contamination this causes. Next slide is my son. This is Arden, and he is overlooking the Panther Creek drainage, which is the backside of our property. I'll just move on to the next slide so I don't start crying on this one. So this is a picture of dirt. This was taken September 2019, nearly 2 years after the fire burned, and the soil is still sterile. It's nothing but ash for several inches, and there is nothing it's in the hot spots. Next slide shows a stump. We learned about burning stumps, and depending on their size, they can continue to burn underground for months and months. And this causes all sorts of issues and hazards and problems with wildlife and water, and can even reignite if there's another wind event and flare up another cycle of burning. And I've even heard stories where during a drought winter season where there's not much rain, they can simmer all through the winter and then flare up again the next summer. I had no idea. So that was a very big learning lesson on stumps. Next slide shows, so in 2019, our Oregon Representative Peter DeFazio requested an investigation into the U.S. Forest Service's firefighting response to the Chetco Bar Fire. And we were allowed to present our research to the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO, during their investigation. We met once in person and once over the phone, and were honored to be part of that investigation. Next slide, solutions. Yes, so what can we do going forward? So the Chetco Bar Fire ultimately burned, in the end, 191,000 acres, and it cost the taxpayers almost $61 million. So I wanted to just briefly mention a few things that we might be able to do going forward. Next slide. So I think that we really need to focus on expanding our collaboration between public and private entities. We need to teach and educate our officials about our TEK, our traditional ecological knowledge. We cannot assume that they already know or that they're interested. So we really have to pursue that collaboration and teach. We need to, in fact, demand that local and tribal involvement. Again, we can't assume that they're going to invite us to the table, and we need to demand and make sure that we are at the table. We need to develop coordination plans and MOUs, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. We know our land better than anyone else, and we need to teach. Again, we need to teach our community, our leaders, our state, and our federal representatives that we are here and we know about our land. Next shot shows the Chetco River near the Eagle Creek drainage, and you can see in this picture how the fire burned hot right down to the river. We need our tribal youth and our tribal elders and our tribal advocates. We need GIS data mappers to map these riverbanks for erosion and collect data on how our salmon are affected by wildfires, how our lampreys are affected, our water quality, the contaminant levels, the sediment, all these things we need to track and map and monitor. And the next slide is just an old historical photo from Red Mountain showing the prairies again. And we were an oak savanna and we had many prairies that we don't have today, and to try to restore those traditional prairies and our traditional fire practices. And I will end with a final statement saying that if I could leave you with one key takeaway today, it would be this. Don't assume. That is what I learned. Don't assume anything. We have to be very active and very diligent with our TEK, our traditional ecological knowledge, and protecting our forests and our waters. And that is the end of my slide. That is the end of my presentation. And once again, I just want to say, shoot, Shanina, thank you so much. I was very honored to participate and be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Katrina. That's quite a story, and I really appreciate that you provided, not only just the very challenging aspects of all of what you and your family have been through, but also kind of your perceived solutions for the future. I think that's really important. It's easy to get stuck in this place of feeling overwhelmed and what can we do, and there's nothing that we can do, but to really kind of continue with that ability to think about what next steps are, which just proves resilience of
resiliency.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. I really enjoyed hearing about your families and your work that you for however long you've been working on it. It's just been really incredible to listen to all you. So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, and we've got plenty of time. I think we have until 3:20. I'm just going to double check on the timing so I don't go over. But we will take a break at 3:20, and then we'll do our closing at 3:30. So we have plenty of time for questions. And I'll just start with the first one from Mary Kate Lowry. Hi, Mary Kate. And Mary Kate had a question, I believe it was for Jewelina. And I'm going to put this on gallery view so we can see. And you guys can turn on your cameras if you want to answer. But Jewelina, what are the challenges you find in gathering the right materials for your weaving? Does your tribe need cultural burns for making the right materials?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. Hang on.
Gathering the materials.
She said, what are the challenges you find in gathering the right materials for your weaving? Does your tribe need cultural burns for making the right materials?
So, well, what I do, because with Yokaeo is only 120 acres, so we don't really have a lot of material. I mean, I could do it for myself. But when you're going out and trying to gather the right materials, you do have to tend to the willow. So if you go out and you gather materials, there's steps that you have to take to ensure that the next year or 3 years down the line, we get straight shoots. So that's the what we do is we do burn. We will burn the willow because we what I've seen is that when it regenerates itself, it provides straight shoots. But some of the difficulties have been trying to collect in certain areas. Sometimes it's along the highway. Sometimes it's in areas where it was our ancestral sites. It was part of our ancestral sites, and we no longer have access to that because of private property owners. So what I kind of do with the weaving was building that relationship with Corinne Pierce, who she actually taught me a lot about collecting, and you know, it's really her life's work to do that. For me, with weaving, it's just something that I learned from my grandmother, and so that's why I do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And one of the things that you brought up just now kind of ties to one of the questions that I was thinking. That's kind of like a recurring theme in a lot of the presentations that have taken place today, which is how it's kind of interesting how systems created by settler colonialism societies have failed communities, and particularly like Indigenous communities, in so many ways, though they're supposed to be protecting. And I just find that quite interesting. So whatever the resilience we need to push past that, we'll find it, I'm sure. But thank you for your answer. The next question we have is from Laurie Montserrat, and it's for Sinead. She says, I'd be interested to learn about impacts of climate change on Karuk women and their roles and traditions. Do you know of any work on that subject? And thank you so much for your presentation. Great literature.
Thank you, Lori. I do have a couple ideas. Climate change and the impacts of that on Karuk women is going to be part of the discussion I bring into, like, especially the background. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention there is that the Karuk tribe actually has its own climate adaptation plan that they published last year in 2019. The co-authors on that are Dr. Kari Norgard, and who I mentioned, she was in the presentation. She recently also published Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People, where she talks a little bit about gendered impacts of colonialism, and she mentions climate change and talks about it to an extent. So she's done a lot of, she's been a real like champion for Karuk people's work in her own spaces and being sure to collaborate on a lot of different things over the past, I think, like 20 something years. So yeah, I would really recommend her work. And then there was also another report out of University of Oregon from Kirsten Vignetta. And she did a report with Kyle Powes-White and Kathy Lynn on climate change through an intersectional lens. And so that also talks about gendered resilience in Indigenous communities. And those are the only two that I'm familiar with enough to have already brought them into the literature review. I'm doing more research on that, but I appreciate your question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sinead. I think, you know, like I said before, those resources, the literature review that you presented is incredible. And I actually will probably email you to get a list because I think they'd be helpful in some of the work that I do as well. So thank you for that. And then we have another question from Mary Kate. She asks, how can the public access your data you presented? I'm not sure who that one was for. Let's see. Mary Kate, do you want to put into the chat who that question was specifically for? Oh, for Katrina.
Hi, Mary Kate. Yeah, so that's a little complex. So the GOA, the Government Accounting Office investigative report was released earlier this year and is available to the public. However, it is not very sympathetic to the locals and was protective of the Forest Service. We were kind of disappointed with it, but that one is available publicly. A lot of the information that we have was from FOIA requests from the Forest Service, which I might note we still have yet to have that request completed. We have not received all of the material that we have requested. And there is a lot more in those FOIA requests that I did not cover today. One example is there were 10 55-gallon drums found at the Chetco Bar, the site of the start of the fire, and many more interesting things that are not typically available to the public, but you can FOIA request them, or if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to discuss other issues that were in my presentation. I'll put my information in the chat.
Awesome, thank you so much. So yeah, if there are any more questions that people have for these awesome presenters, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I had a couple of things that I just wanted to touch on, and it's kind of open to all three of you, so jump in. One of the other kind of themes that it's not necessarily just a theme. I mean, it just kind of proves the interconnectedness between like all things on the planet. But, you know, just in this kind of session, we've talked about fire, water, soil, wildlife, and like how humanity is affected and interacts with all of these different parts of our ecosystem. And I just really think I really value kind of the information that you brought from your own kind of ways of learning and understanding to kind of show those interconnections. And so if anybody wants to talk about the importance of that or talk any deeper about kind of how those connections are meaningful to you, then that would be great.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. Can you hear me? Okay. So, I guess one of the things that I wasn't able to really cover like I had wanted to was why it was so important for me. So throughout my life, what I noticed is that I didn't receive a lot of resources that would have been of value to me through education, right? So using that in a way where I've taken, so okay, so my story really, it is that I wasn't going to school a lot because I was home, and I was home because I was living out on the res, and out there, you know, what it is you're pretty much, it's imprisonment. So me growing up, having to deal with that, and trying to find a way to still provide some sort of healing within our communities. I learned a lot about our traditions and our stories, and I learned a lot about it from my grandmother, my uncle, my cousins, you know, everyone that I've built relationships with inside of our community. And so me seeing that, what it did for me, in healing, in staying out of trouble, in using what I've learned throughout my life in a way that it can help other people. For myself, it's just about educating our youth. And so for me, it's really important that we can still enjoy things such as artwork, but use that as an opportunity to still educate ourselves and our people, and then acknowledge the relationships that we held with the plants and animals in our environment, and connect to our ancestors that way, those ones who aren't here with us anymore. So for me, it's really important in my work that I continuously share traditional knowledge with our people. It's medicine, and it's a part of how I see it as me being a steward in that way, where I can educate people and help them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's
Sorry.
no, and you brought up other kind of themes that that I picked up on throughout the entire day of symposium that we had today. So thank you for saying that. And I just want to give everybody else an opportunity to respond as well, if you'd like to.
Could you repeat the question, Carrie?
I'm not sure so much a question, more like an observation. But yeah, I can kind of summarize. I think I said kind of like that I noticed throughout the themes or throughout the presentations today that this theme of how everything is just so interconnected between fire, water, soil, wildlife, and like people being a part of that, and kind of what those connections mean, or how you can kind of deeper explore or explain kind of why that's so important to you.
For me, growing up, my ancestors hid in the forest. They escaped removal and hid, and so a lot of our culture was lost because I did not grow up on the reservation, and she did not stay on the reservation. And because of this hiding for, because there was a price on her head, we lost a lot of culture, a lot of songs, a lot of information, and to keep it from being lost forever and to try to reconnect to that, it was through the land and the forest and the water. We held on to what was important. And the forest is our grocery store, it's our medicine cabinet, it's everything to us, as well as the water. So that's how we not only survived the genocide, but it was also how we survived the colonialization and the loss of our culture, and are now trying to restore those forests and restore the culture.
Thank you. And Sinead, would you like to add anything? You don't have to, but.
Briefly, I have been thinking about something. I guess I'm definitely approaching this work as a Karuk and Yurok person raised along the Klamath River, and so that's been an important part of recognizing the interconnectedness of everything and kind of really learning from these. I don't know how to even, these people within the community who have been just doing this work as their like life's work, and that's how they conduct themselves. And I'm thinking of people like, I'm thinking of a lot of people who are not, and how impactful that has been. And so that connection to place is just such an important part of my own upbringing. I'm coming at this work also as the descendant of a boarding school survivor, and as someone who hunts and fishes and gathers and processes materials as a basket weaver, as someone who spends a lot of time out on the land. And so I don't know, I just have seen for my own self, and for the people that I'm close to in my life, I've seen that's such a lifeline for people, and how healing those connections can be. And so just it's also healing to talk about those connections at times too. And so that this is kind of an exercise in that healing process, and just, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from on it, I guess. I could speak more to things, but I won't today.
Thank you for adding that. I really appreciate all of your perspectives. And we do have one more question. It's from an anonymous attendee, and it's for all panelists. What are ways you stay supported, strong, empowered to do your work? What are the things the public can do to help in your activism? And I think that's a really important question, because a lot of times after, you know, the webinars that we kind of hosted over the summer, or any of the webinars that have been hosted, a lot of non-Indigenous, you know, like allies are trying to figure out what they can do. And so we would love to hear if there are things in particular that allies can do to support the work that you're all kind of spending your life perpetuating.
I guess I'll go ahead and answer first. But my answer to that would be, I guess taking back the information that you would learn from me, because a lot of, like I said, you know, a lot of things that could seem as insignificant as a piece of artwork, I actually use to educate the public. And that does include things such as fishing and hunting and gathering and all those different things. So one way that I feel like the community can actually help is by learning about our stories and taking it back with you and your community, and not doing it in a way to where, I guess, they try to practice our ways or our culture, because, you know, that's a touchy subject. But if you're able to do anything to make it, I guess for me anyway, because I try to I do it for our community, and one of the things that really keeps me strong and keeps me going is my children. And I have 4 babies, so the things that I do, it's really about what I can offer our community, so that way my children don't have to one day wonder where they came from, like I did throughout my whole entire life. Trying to figure out our history. I want my children to know where they come from. And I think that the way that the community can help is by spreading awareness about the obstacles that we face as Indigenous people, the issues going on with our climate, and talking about those, supporting us in that way, because you know, financially we could all use it, but if, you know, no one can help financially, I think that, you know, leading those roles within our households is definitely going to help with my work in the long, you know, on the long route. So that's just my answer.
Thank you for sharing that. That's super important. And again, I don't know if you were able to put in a link to connect people to the work that you're doing. I think that would be really helpful for people. And I think art is a really incredible form of decolonization. And yeah, I just really appreciate you sharing your history with us and your story.
Yeah, about the workshop. So it's still in the works. We haven't actually got like a set date. I guess if what you could do is kind of provide like I guess my email would work. That way, if anyone would be interested, I can start, I can email them once that date is set for the workshop. Because yeah, right now, because of everything that was going on this last month, I kind of shared with you a little bit, you know, I kind of put a lot of the things on the side. So even me just presenting today, I'm glad I was able to still do this today. So I appreciate it, and being patient with me and like working alongside me and helping me with that. So yeah, but I will also, I guess, Facebook is one way that I'll be using to post the information as well. So either Facebook or just my email, and then I'll get that information to anyone interested.
Great. Yeah, I can share it. I'll try to share it in the chat in just a few minutes. And we totally understand, obviously, with everything going on. And I know that you had an extenuating month. So we get it. So we're very glad that you could be here.
Right on.
Katrina or Sinead, would you guys like to participate in answering the question?
Sure, I'll go ahead and just say that talking and teaching is hugely important. There's so much to do. There's so much work to do in collaborating and creating coordination plans, and with so many different agencies, local, state, and national. There's just so much work to do. So for anybody that is interested in being an ally or an activist for any of our work or causes, we definitely do need your help. Definitely, please join us. There's a lot of work to do. Yeah, we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you. And I think you already put your contact information in the chat, so people can feel free to get in touch with you that way if they want to learn more or donate to any of the things that you work on. You have a lot of projects that you have going on, so that's super awesome. And we have a couple minutes left. So Sinead, did you want to add anything to that, or we can kind of wrap up?
You can go ahead and wrap up. I've got this baby here that just woke up from a nap, but I guess the one thing I would say is just to support Indigenous women, support Indigenous efforts to reclaim their land and spaces and cultures, and do that financially if you can. Okay, so yes, time for wrap up, I think.
Thank you for sharing your baby with us. It's super awesome. And I was just going to say, like, the kind of the three terms that come to mind over and over that have been just repeated throughout today's sessions are healing, intergenerational, and relationship. And I can't tell you how important, as a non-Indigenous white settler, working with many Indigenous peoples and learning from, like, so much from the people that I work with, how much those words mean to me as an individual without even like understanding the importance of it from your perspective, and just really being able to get in touch with those words on a deeper level over the last couple of years. It's been really important work, and so I'm very grateful to be able to work with all of you and to have been the host for the session today. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 3:30 for the closing for the symposium. And you will stay, if you're going to stay for the closing, you can stay in this link in this webinar, but we are going to close out the other one. It might have already been closed out, I'm not quite sure, but Cody, I think, is going to play some music. And thank you all so much for attending. I'm so grateful to everybody who's able to take the time out of their very busy, crazy pre-Halloween Friday day to be with us. And thank you for attending to all of our panelists as well. Have a great day, everybody.